Inside Florida Politics, powered by the USA Today Florida Network. Well, it's Florida at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee with Ron DeSantis, Matt Gaetz, Byron Donalds, and many others speaking at an event turned on its head by the attempted assassination last week of Donald Trump. Here to break it all down with me is Antonio Fins of the Palm Beach Post and Gannett State Capitol reporter John Kennedy. And we are live here from the Republican National Convention. Antonio and I are standing on the terrace of the media workspace. Right across from us over here is where the convention is actually taking place, just a block away. We've been inside for the last 4 days, just getting all the sights and sounds of what's happening here. And there's a lot going on. We're going to break it all down with you. And we're going to start with Governor Ron DeSantis, who delivered a speech 2 days ago that was really a bit of a barn burner. John, what was your takeaway from it?
Well, you know, Zach, in a convention which Republicans are trying to cast as a unity event, really, DeSantis did what the governor does best, and that's divide. You know, during his relatively short but very energetic speech, DeSantis threw up some perceived enemies and then talked about how he and fellow Republicans, starting with Trump, are fighting back against them. His speech at the Republican National Convention was well received. And, you know, after all, these delegates seem to thrive on feeling threatened by outside forces. And DeSantis got a lot of cheers for accusing the Biden administration of wanting to, you kind of name it, ban gas automobiles, take away gun rights, expand gender ideology, and retain diversity programs. And, he also punctuated his speech by pledging to never, ever surrender to the woke mob. He even got a appreciated laugh from Donald Trump in the VIP box when he said Democrats and Biden were running a weekend at Bernie's campaign, which harkens back to a movie about two young guy employees who have to pretend that their dead boss isn't dead. Clearly that was targeted at Biden's now challenged state. So DeSantis got a lot of love, but he has his own challenges going forward, given that Trump making J.D. Vance his vice presidential pick. That's widely seen as kind of a passing the torch moment for his MAGA base that could well end any aspirations that DeSantis may have for the White House in 2028.
Yeah, John, the content of the speech was interesting, but just the fact that he's here is interesting, and the politics of it going forward. Just him coming here, there was reporting that he wasn't initially on the schedule of speakers, that he was left off and then was added later. Obviously him and Trump really went at it in the primary, but this has kind of been pitched as a unity convention.
Yeah, he was added, and then even later, Nikki Haley was added, another rival during the.
And they spoke back to back.
Yeah, and they spoke back to back. But, DeSantis, we all remember, he failed miserably running last year, but many saw him as positioned to make another go for the presidency in 4 years when Trump wouldn't be such an obstacle. But now there's J.D. Vance as a potential heir apparent, and that could well alter DeSantis's political course.
Yeah, but DeSantis is obviously, John, trying to keep himself in the mix. He went to the Iowa breakfast. Everybody knows what happens in Iowa, an important caucus state, first in the nation. He seems to still think there's a chance here, or at least is trying to keep that door open.
Right, because in fairness, I guess the door still is open to a degree. Vance is even younger than the 45-year-old DeSantis, and at this point, he would seem to be positioned to be a Trump MAGA successor. But could Vance disappear in the role of vice president if they win in November, or could he perform poorly as a vice president? DeSantis may still think he has a path to Pennsylvania Avenue, and the reception he got at the RNC shows he still knows how to push the buttons that motivate this voting base.
Up next, we break down all the other Florida speakers at the convention. And so Antonio DeSantis, obviously that story is one of the bigger ones for Florida in terms of him speaking here and what he said and the unity moment. with Trump, but there's a lot of other Florida politicos here.
Yeah.
Rick Scott gave a speech. Matt Gaetz gave a speech. Byron Donalds gave a speech. Yesterday was like Florida Day. You had Anna Paulina Luna, Corey Mills, a lot of others. Let's start with Gaetz. He got into a really interesting confrontation on the floor of the convention with former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Obviously, there's no love lost between the two of them.
No, there's not. And to be honest, the message that the Republican Party is trying to convey in this convention is unity. We're all unified. Whatever issues we had in the past is the past. That moment on the convention floor where McCarthy was being interviewed by CNN and then Gaetz interrupted to heckle him.
That really laid bare that there's not a lot.
Right.
There's still some pretty big divisions underneath.
And you have to imagine that that the chieftains over at the RNC were not too happy with that because it happened. It was publicly on the air, live with national television, and that basically when you try to torpedo your message, that was a textbook case. The interesting thing is Byron Donalds. John was mentioning that there's a torch to be passed in the MAGA movement. Well, you know what? There's also a torch to be passed in Florida because Governor DeSantis is term limited.
Yeah, and there's a lot of jockeying. People are wondering who's going to run for governor in 2026. Exactly. Byron Donalds, Matt Gaetz are all in the mix.
Donald has come across as a rock star here. I mean, he was out the other day taking photos with the security guards. He's been moving. He's been everywhere.
He was in Trump's suite, the family suite, sitting right next to him on the first day of the convention.
This morning, before the Florida delegation breakfast, he was going up the escalator. A gentleman was going down the escalator. The gentleman yelled, "Hey, Governor!" And Byron Donalds kind of smiled and waved to him. So there's that. And then there's an opportunity. Look, the Florida delegation is, for the first time that I've ever seen, is front and center.
Yeah, they're really right in the middle of all the action, right in front of the stage. They got I was told, a really nice hotel that's
right over there.
Yeah, right down the street.
Right there,
So they're getting the royal treatment here. Trump lives in Florida. It's a big part of his base.
And the lineup that we've seen every night has reflected that. It's not just a cosmetic thing. It's not just okay, we gave you the hotel with the skywalk right into the center here. No, it's the front and center. They are stating the case. They're making, just like Trump is making the case to the American public, Florida is making the case to the GOP that we are the trendsetter here. We're now the conservative bellwether, and that has all sorts of implications, particularly for fundraising and donors. So this has been as much as this has been a very, you have to think just as a bystander, it's been a successful carrying of the message of unity for the national party. There's been the Florida delegation, I think, has really hammered home the idea that we are the trendsetter.
So this reinforces that Florida is sort of the epicenter of the MAGA movement. Anything else that was interesting about the speakers from Florida? We had Rick Scott. We had, Gaetz didn't really get a prime convention speaking spot, even though he is really seen as maybe the Floridian or maybe Byron Donalds, the two of them that are the closest to Trump in terms of the elected officials. Anything else stand out from?
Well, I think Anna Paulina Luna, newcomer, new face of the party. And the interesting thing about her is that after the shooting, she co-authored a letter calling for civility with another newcomer on the Democratic side, Jared Moskowitz, who's a South Florida congressman, a Democrat. They co-authored this bipartisan letter calling for civility, saying, hey, look, we're all going to temper the rhetoric. So that was, I think, kind of interesting, given what she then said, to have had sent this letter as well.
Up next, we talk about the activities of the Florida delegation, including the Trump family. And we talked about the Florida delegation. DeSantis spoke to the delegation, Byron Donalds, others. The delegation is also pretty interesting because you have the Trump family, who is Eric Trump is actually leading the delegation. Don Jr. is part of the delegation. His girlfriend, Kimberly Guilfoyle, even Barron Trump, the youngest Trump son, although we haven't seen Barron around here. Melania is supposed to be here tonight. Anything else interesting about the Florida delegation?
Well, the fact of the matter is that they're intertwined. And it was very interesting when Eric Trump spoke to the delegation on Tuesday, that, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but it was very much this alternating message that the Trump family has been delivering, which is they have really spoken for the first time that I remember about themselves
Yeah.
and about their interpersonal, interfamiliar
Well, it
relations.
seems like they're really trying to humanize Trump, that
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
really
exactly,
trying
exactly.
to take this as a
Yeah.
moment
Yeah.
to cause people to maybe take a second look. You know, he's obviously been a very divisive figure. He's had all these controversies. He's a convicted felon.
Right.
He's been impeached twice. But this shooting, I think there's a sense that, you know, it was such an awful moment in our country, and that maybe people will rethink things a little bit, that maybe this might be Trump's only chance to kind of change his reputation a little bit. He's talked about unity and trying to get his family involved to try and say, no, there's another side here, that, you know, he's a father,
Yeah,
he's a
absolutely.
grandfather.
Yeah, father, grandfather, his granddaughter spoke last night. Interestingly, she mentioned the competitive spirit, and I actually saw that once when I was at the Doral golf course during the Live golf tournament, and the Trump family was playing, and she was one of the players, and you could see the kind of competitive, like, you know, they were trying to sort of, you know, give her some finer points, but at the same time it was competitive, and I think what they've tried to do in this convention is project this idea that we are a family, we are human beings. You've seen us in like what Lara Trump said the other night. You've seen us in headlines, and you've seen us in memes and on social media, but let us tell you who we are. And I think they've done it pretty effectively.
Well, I know you've been at the Florida delegation breakfast every morning. They've also had evening events. Jimmy Patronis, the chief financial officer, had a event. Wilton Simpson, who is interested potentially also in running for governor. They've had a lot of activities around the convention. Anything else that you've seen from attending them?
Yeah, you know, the one thing that struck me is the question of unity. That this is what they're trying to talk about: unity, unity, unity. At the same time, unity does not mean that they are going to then be more compromising with Democrats.
Yeah.
That they're going to step away from some of these harder line MAGA. There's no interest in that.
I was actually at an event with Don Jr. where he talked about the unity message, and he said, yeah, I do think this will last, but my dad's a fighter. He's always going to punch back, you know, that we're not going to just sit there and take it. So it's like, yeah, unity, but, you know, we're still going to be
and it's like, but Susan McManus, who we've talked to, who's a longtime Florida politics watcher, she said, look, they're kind of, I hear what they're saying, but they're using the wrong word. What they're really talking about isn't so much unity. What they're talking about is civility. And I think that's a good point, that there's a difference between lowering the tone of comment and rhetoric and stepping away from these hard-edged principles that the right of the Republican Party demands purity on, to then cut deals with Democrats. And if you don't think that's problematic, let's ask Kevin McCarthy what he thinks.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll see what Trump says tonight. We're recording this on the morning of the last day of the convention. Trump says that he ripped up the speech. His son, Don Jr., said that it was going to be hot, 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 and that after the shooting, he sort of reconsidered things. And you know, the tone of his speech tonight will say a lot about what he thinks going forward. We're going to go on and wrap this up with a couple of takeaways from the convention. John, you want to tell us yours?
I think I'm really struck by the packaging of this convention. Antonio alluded to this. Republicans from the get-go, advanced this unity theme and seemed intent on putting forward an image of a party that was unified, yes, around Trump, but also somehow reflecting the goals of most voters around this country. But if you were expecting a, George H.W. Bush kinder, gentler Republican Party, well, the unity theme is really just a veneer. To a certain degree, this unity theme, I think, from the MAGA movement and from Trump is more of a surrender now kind of idea. Speakers continue to blame Biden for just about every ill in the country, including the effect of wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that were launched by another Bush, Republican George W. Bush. Immigrants have been demonized as criminals and rapists, even though statistics show immigrant communities are not driving crime. And Biden's economic policies were portrayed as crippling working Americans, although it was the Trump's tax cuts of 2017 that to a great degree skewed, to help wealthier Americans and corporations. And it's often the Republican Party that's the beneficiary of Wall Street corporate donors who we heard J.D. Vance totally, ridicule last night. But again, getting back to that packaging and even the selection of the once working class J.D. Vance, it's clearly aimed at penetrating that blue wall that Democrats thought they had across states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. So spin is the thing. And the Republican National Convention seems to have effectively cast Trump and his allies as ready to lead and poised to gain a rising level of trust from many more voters than in 2020, when Biden swamped Trump in popular support and, of course, in the Electoral College. The packaging and sales pitch is really well timed for the Republicans because, of course, Biden is hemorrhaging support. Both in the polls and among Democrats in Congress. So the Trump message is able to resonate even loudly right now because of the chaos on the other side.
Yeah, that's a good point. The Democrats are really in disarray at this point. The Republicans are unified, and the party that seems to be more unified usually has the advantage in the election. How about you, Antonio? What was your takeaway?
Look, one of the things I've been spending a lot of time talking to is Latinos. And this has long been a base for Democratic support. Republicans, if the polls are correct, are making big time inroads. So I've been talking to all sorts of Hispanic voters that are here, delegates, and so forth. And I will tell you that as broad as the nationalities are that are represented in the U.S. Hispanic population, there are also a lot of different interests. There's evangelicals, there's small business owners. And so I've been talking to a broad swath of them, and what I'm hearing is that there is a real appeal that's been made here to Hispanics, and a very compelling case has been made to them that they feel that they're really interested in what they're hearing from the Republican Party. And the question is, when it's a Democrat's turn, are they able to then counter it and keep a lot of Latino voters in the column for them? Because if the polls are right and those margins have really shrunk in that demographic, the Democrats are really in trouble.
Yeah, key voting block. And there was, the speculation as to how hard Trump would go at that and maybe pick Marco Rubio as his running mate and really make a hard play for Hispanic voters. He didn't end up doing that, but I think that Rubio is still going to be a prominent surrogate. He got a really good convention speaking slot. So I think that, the party is probably pretty excited about where the inroads that they might be able to make with that group. My takeaway is that things have really changed in the Trump family in terms of who really has the power, who's kind of rising, who's taking a back seat. Here at this convention, you really saw Don Jr. and Eric Trump really being front and center rather than Ivanka Trump or a Jared Kushner, who are supposed to be here tonight, but haven't been circulating, haven't been going to events. Don Jr. especially has been extremely active. He spoke last night in introducing J.D. Vance. There was some reporting that he was instrumental in his father going with Vance as his running mate. The event that I went to, Junior talked about, he doesn't want to pick people in the next Trump administration if his father wins, but he wants to be the veto power. He wants to be a gatekeeper. He wants to keep people out who he doesn't like. So it sounds like that he's going to be extremely involved going forward, and that'll be something to watch. Well, that wraps up our live episode of Inside Florida Politics from the Republican National Convention. You can go online to see all our coverage. There's a ton of stories that we've written. There's a lot going on, a lot of video and audio. So please check it out. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you to Rob Landers, our producer. We'll see you next time.